Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe for more. Also, please leave a like if you enjoyed it. The first story is called, Always Respect Your Rent Agreement. 3 years ago, I was in college, studying business with a minor in photography. I had aspirations of becoming a freelance photographer. While attending college, I was renting the basement of a house from a woman who lived near the college. She and I got along great up until this dispute. The basement of this house had an extra room that I wasn't using. It was a small room but big enough to turn it into a home studio. So I set up my studio lighting set and backdrop and began advertising my services. I was working for free as I wanted to build a portfolio, and I figured that was the best way to attract people who would let me use their photos. Basically, the deal was that I'll take your photo with professional equipment free of charge as long as you sign a contract that says I can include the photo in my portfolio. The landlady eventually started to notice that I had guests a few times a week and that it was rarely the same people more than once. So, she asks what that's about. Fair enough. I explain it to her and suddenly she flips her lid. She says that I'm in violation of my contract because the rent agreement says that I'm not allowed to run a business from the basement. She tells me if I don't tear down the studio and stop immediately, she'll evict me. One of my friends at the college is studying law because her father owns a small firm and she wants to inherit the business. So, I brought the rent agreement to her father to make my case. It says I can't run a business, but a free service is not business. He agrees and says he'll see what he can do for me. In his research, he finds out she is actually renting the whole house from someone else and is subletting to me. My rent agreement has a clause that prohibits subletting, and, while he didn't have a copy of the agreement she signed with the actual owner, he figures hers probably did too. He eventually managed to find out who the actual owner of the house is and lets me know. Now, keep in mind, I don't actually know whether she's prohibited from subletting, so I would have no reason to avoid contacting him. I sent him an email, asking for permission to continue running my studio free of charge. The very next day, he comes to the house and absolutely loses it on her. He was saying that she violated her contract, that she needs to find a new place to live, and that he's going to sue her. And the best part? He let me stay and let me keep my studio. Also, he used my services a few times for himself. The next story is called, You Want Me to Submit Timesheets? I used to work at a large, international company in an inside sales role where we were paid on a salary and commission basis. My boss was bad, there was no career path, and the corporation was an incoherent mess. But the team was cool and the money was good, so it wasn't a bad job overall. Fast forward to the end of my second year on the team and our boss calls a team meeting, where his boss announces that after a long, protracted battle with the Department of Labor, our team were being reclassified as hourly employees and going forward we would need to submit timesheets in order to receive our base earnings. Needless to say, since we were accustomed to taking all the free time available to us during the day for breaks, this was not a popular decision. After a few minutes of us arguing and pushing back against this, my boss announced that the decision was done and we earned the bulk of our pay through commissions, so we'll just have to deal with it. At this point, I feel that I should mention that I have a somewhat casual relationship with time. When it comes to important things like client appointments, I'm always prompt and ready to go right on time, but in terms of showing up for work exactly when I need to start my day, or 15 minutes early as some bosses expect, is just not my thing. My attitude has always been that as long as you're producing and getting your job done, who cares if you're 15 minutes late in the morning or take an extra long break in the afternoon or leave right at 5 on the dot. It's an office job, not one where someone else is relying on my promptness to end their shift. I've consistently had a good performance, and while I've had my share of obligatory, please show up on time conversations with bosses, they eventually realize I'm super productive, so they just let me do my thing. But now I had to start documenting my time. I checked the official human resource notice about the change and my role is expected to work a maximum of 40 hours a week. And now that I'm an hourly employee instead of salaried, I am also eligible for overtime. Well, if I'm forced to do this and rules are rules, then I'm going to document my hours perfectly. I start noting exactly when I showed up at the office in the morning, start and end of every break, and exactly when I leave down to the minute. At the same time, I started to work straight through my lunch hour and I started showing up a few minutes earlier than usual to start my day too, to clock in properly. I started submitting timesheets for 45 or 50 hours a week and started to bank a good chunk of overtime at time and a half per paycheck that I previously was ineligible for and was not budgeted for by the company. Fast forward a few weeks and my boss calls me over to his desk. He had my timesheet up with start and end times and was not happy. I forget what exactly he said, but he basically told me to knock it off and round my times to the official start and end time, like everyone else on the team. He wasn't a bright individual and I realized 3 things. He just didn't like counting my hours to the minute. He never said anything about my non-existent lunch breaks. And he either knew nothing or said nothing about my overtime pay. No problem, boss, you got it. From then on, my start and end times matched the official times, but I continued to either work through lunch or take only 30 minutes of the allocated 60 minutes and continued to submit timesheets with 2 to 5 hours of overtime. I never heard another thing from my boss, and a few weeks later, they quietly discontinued the manual timesheets and just paid us in full at our annual salaried rate. The third story is called, I Want It Now. I often represent people in a type of case that boils down to turning their medical conditions into money. The average case takes about 3 years from start to finish and requires going over about a decade worth of medical history in order to prove what I need to prove in order to win. In one such case, I represented a lady who was also going through a messy divorce. I did not represent her in the divorce. She had a condition that affected a lot of different areas of the body, and so she had to visit a lot of different specialists. This meant that her file was much larger than average. After a few years, we ended up winning the case. When a case is won, we get a notice that the case had been won, and then, about a month or two later, we find out how much we won in a short summary letter. About a week after we found out that we won the case, and well before we would find out how much we won, I ended up receiving a subpoena for me to fax over the lady's file from the guy representing her husband in the divorce. A subpoena is basically a court order requiring someone to turn over something or risk penalties. Now, it's obvious what this guy actually wants. He wants the letter saying how much she is going to be getting. That's the only thing relevant to the divorce because it affects support calculations. He doesn't want the other stuff. He probably just doesn't know exactly what the thing he wants is called, and so he's casting a wide net. The normal procedure for getting that information would be to just give me a phone call and ask for the number. If there's a dispute, he could also ask for proof of that number. It's quick, it's easy, and it's polite. Instead, this guy went straight for the subpoena. It's a little rude, but whatever, maybe he just doesn't like talking to people on the phone. I get that. When I get the subpoena, I give the guy a call. I want to let him know that the thing he's after won't be available for up to another month, and to confirm that he only wants the letter, not the entire file. He's having none of it. He starts the call angry and he ends it quickly. He treats me like the opponent, which I'm not, and doesn't let me get more than a word or two in at a time before interrupting me. He keeps repeating, "You don't tell me what I want. I tell you what I want. You send me the whole file or you'll be getting a show cause." A show cause is asking the court to make someone do something the court already told them to do. You probably see where this is going. He wants a single letter, but he was mean and he specifically demanded the entire file. So, I faxed him the entire file. All 8,964 pages of it. We use electronic faxes, so on my end, it's no different than attaching documents to an email. On his end, his fax machine is tied up for at least a few hours, burning through several reams of paper. And that's not even the best part. The best part is that he then has to skim through all of those pages looking for the one sentence he actually wants, and it's not in there, because it's not a part of the file yet. It's entirely possible that he uses an electronic fax, or that he started cancelling the faxes as they came through to save on paper. I never heard back from him, so I can't know for sure what the situation looked like on his end. The next story is called, Do Everything by the Manuals. I work as an aircraft mechanic for an airline. This story is about my last week at my previous airline. When fixing aircraft, you are required to have technical data on everything you do. On commercial aircrafts, it's normally pretty easy since most everything of what we do has detailed manuals giving step-by-step instructions and references to other manual sections. As certified mechanics, we are required to have our manuals readily accessible as we do our work. Generally, it's considered acceptable to have our manuals up on our computer where we were working. We had mobile workstations in the hangar and laptops at the gate. The management at our base didn't think this was going to be okay with the aviation administration, as it depends on the local inspectors, and started demanding we print out our manuals. A few months of this and they started getting harder on us because we weren't printing out all of our manuals. We aren't printing out 8 pages of manuals to service engine oil or checking tire pressures. We would literally spend more time printing it out than on the job. I was moving across the country and getting a job with a different airline. Knowing I was in my last week, my leads and supervisors came to me with a glorious proposal. Management wanted all the manuals printed out? Well, they wanted me to do a routine inspection and print out all the manuals and follow them to the letter. Normally this inspection can be done by one experienced mechanic in 2 hours. Not tonight. We pulled the plane in and I hit the computer. I printed the inspection card and then the manual for the checking lights. This needed the manual for making aircraft safe for maintenance, which needed the manual for parking the aircraft. and the manual for electrically grounding the aircraft, and the manual for installing all the probe covers, wheel covers, engine plugs, etc. And this goes on for over 250 pages, just to make the aircraft safe for maintenance. I spend 5 hours printing all the manuals just for that, finding and installing the covers. And the best part of all of this is that one of the wheel covers was missing. Technically I could no longer make the aircraft safe for maintenance because the manual never said this step was optional, so I wrote up in the logbook, unable to perform due to failure to make safe for maintenance due to missing wheel cover. This grounds the airplane. Now an emergency aircraft on ground order for a wheel cover is created by my laughing supervisors. This is an expensive emergency order to find or purchase the closest wheel cover and get a courier to special deliver it if it couldn't get flown in by one of our planes. And the way I wrote it up, no one could lay a finger on the plane until that cover arrived. Grounded for a full day, no passengers were delayed, we had a spare plane, but still very expensive for the airline. Management blew a gasket at first, then realized they could not legally punish anyone for following the federal law exactly. The next week they saw how unrealistic that compliance truly was and let all my now former co-workers work as the certified professionals they are. The last story is called, You Said They Were Important. About 17 years ago, I was a night auditor at a very nice hotel. Every night, I would go through the transactions, balancing everything to the penny, and then I would close out the day in the accounting software. When I ran the audit, it prompted the system to print off a long series of reports, which then had to put together in a big packet of documents for the accounting assistant, Melissa, who was both dumb as a box of rocks and snotty as hell. I was constantly getting notes and calls about the most ridiculous things. My boss, the hotel manager, couldn't stand her, but she worked for corporate. For example, on one of the reports that she demanded that I create, she had a field where she wanted me to put the weather as it was at noon that day. I was a night auditor. I was generally asleep at noon. I once asked her why she didn't just fill that in herself, as she was actually awake at that time of day and I typically was not. I got a snappy answer about it being my job. Back to this particular incident. Our system had an odd quirk. When printing the end-of-day reports, it produced a page for every transaction type possible, even if there were no transactions of that type for that day. However, the page would be blank. At the end was a master report that listed all of the transaction types and stated how many transactions were of that type and the dollar amount. While putting together these packets one night, I realized that we were wasting a fair amount of paper by including the blank pages, which would end up being filed and never see the light of day again. I started taking the blank pages out and putting them back in the printer. After all, the master report showed why the page was not there and there were 2 other reports that would show that as well. Melissa flipped out. She called me at 11 and woke me out of sleep to yell at me about how much she needed those reports. I listened, and then calmly asked her, Melissa, why do you need them? They are blank pieces of paper. She said, because I need to show that there were no transactions. You have 3 places in the packets that make that clear. The master report says outright 0 transactions, $0. But I still need them. But they are blank. If I shuffled the papers and put the pages out of order, you wouldn't even be able to tell one from another, right? Well, yes. So what is the point of having them? A long silence. I just need them. They are very important, so always put them in the packet from now on. Okay then. The next night, as the reports churned out of the printer, I stuck 5 blank pieces of paper in each place where a blank page had been put out by the system and bundled up the packet as usual. I got a very confused phone call the next day. Why are there all these extra pieces of paper in the audit packet? You wanted the blank pages. You said they were very important. But why are there extras? I said, with a happy voice, you said those reports were very important. So I made extra copies for you. A long silence. Then a phone rang in the background and she had to go answer it. The next night, the hotel manager was waiting for me, with a grin. You can go ahead and put the blank pages in the printer. She flipped out about it to the head of accounting, who agreed with you, and then she flipped out on me and told me I need to talk to you about it. So, thank you for giving me a good laugh today. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.